standing, I guess I'll introduce Randy Reichert, CEO of Skeena, Rob Egmond, the VP Exploration for Dolly Varden, and on the far side, Dave Stewart, Corporate Development for Ascot. So please welcome our panelists. So before we dive in, I just want to give a little bit of context. I cover all three companies from a research point of view. I probably own every stock for full disclosure, and we provide research information, not advice. So that's kind of my forward-looking statement. The Golden Triangle is a special compact area in BC. It's a bunch of stacked arcs for the geologists in the crowd that has created tremendous endowment in a fairly small area. Okay, so that's what it's got. It's got fantastic geology, broadly got really good First Nations alignment, and finally, it's got the infrastructure, the power and road infrastructure. And it was largely leveraged by a bit of a build it and they will come movement back in the early 2000s. So go back to 2012, and aside from Teck, there was no senior mine companies in the Golden Triangle, right? Fast forward today, and we have Newcrest owning 2 mines. We've got Skeena developing their mine. Ascot's permitted and in the throes of building their mine, re-permitting. And the outcome has been $4.4 billion worth of M&A in the last 5 years. Globally, the Golden Triangle is a bit of a mega district, a focus. It's on all investors' radar screens. When the senior mining companies, excuse me, come in to a jurisdiction, the big fund managers will follow with their capital, is what I've found. They become the derivatives, the other players in that area. Okay. So all of a sudden, you've had that type of activity, but compare it to Alaska. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. $0.4 billion worth of M&A over the same period of time. And largely, they were the front runners of lots of seniors in that jurisdiction, but really not much in the last 10 years other than Northern Star replacing Sumitomo. So you've got this confluence of factors, including the power being put in to electrify the Golden Triangle, Northwest Transmission Line. Red Chris would not be a mine today without that power line. $700 million, $47 million from Imperial to put the spur line in, and it's changed everything for the Golden Triangle. And I hope we can touch on that in some of the questions. So we published research along these lines, and just wanted to give some context. So on a global basis, the Golden Triangle is quite well branded. I think that this organization, BCRMA, has done a good job at various conferences to put it on investors' radar screen and really change the narrative for British Columbia to the extent there was some barriers. Let's find out more about our panelists first. I'd like each one to give a snapshot of their bio, and then maybe a couple minutes just on their asset, just so we can get a bit of a sense of where they are and what they're up to. These are all much more advanced projects in general than you heard on the critical minerals file. And I'll introduce Randy by saying he comes as a veteran mine builder from a company I used to cover, B2Gold, lots of international experience, so hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder, Randy. But Skeena is one of only 6 global tier 1 gold deposits in the world that are in the development pipeline. Okay, plus 300,000 ounces per year, plus 10 years, and in the lower half of the cost curve, more or less the definition most seniors use. So, Randy.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So I'm a career mining processing person, been in operations development projects my entire career. Previous to this, I was with B2Gold, part of a team that developed Fekola mine in Mali, then ran their 3 operations in various jurisdictions of the world. Other development project I was with previously was the B2 Premier previous team, Bema Gold, Kupol in Russia. So similarities is what I saw here.
Okay. And just a thumbnail sketch of SK?
Sure. So SK Creek, former producing mine, 1994 to 2008, one of the highest grade gold mines in the world. Former small underground operation. Really, what Michael was talking about earlier, the power changes this and it allows something as an open pit to be developed there. So we obtained the project in 2017 and are now in the process of developing it. It'll produce in the order of 430,000 gold equivalent ounces in the first 5 years on average, 1.4 billion NPV on it.
Very good, thank you. And then Rob with Dolly Varden, same thing on the bio and then the project, maybe a thumbnail sketch. And this is a story of consolidation that I think is going to be really interesting as we get into the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'm Rob Van Egmond, the Vice President of Exploration for Dolly Varden. I got my start during the 80s as a student at UBC in the Golden Triangle, and I'm glad to be working back there again. I've spent many of my years overseas, but with the changes in infrastructure and the amount of work going on, it's good to be back working in British Columbia. And Dolly Varden is a story of consolidation. It was one property that was a silver play, and so there was past production, about 20 million ounces of silver, starting in 1919 and finishing around 1959. So there is a history of mining there, and we're on the Nisga'a First Nations territory. And so they are used to the mining happening there. But we recently acquired Homestake Ridge to the north, so now we have a gold and silver property, so about 1 million ounces of gold and 36 million ounces of silver right now. And we're just at the exploration stage, just expanding our resources and looking
Great.
for new deposits.
Thanks, Rob. And finally, David, strategically located mill in the process, 2,500 tons per day on Tidewater. Take it away, David.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael. David Stewart, VP of Corporate Development for Ascot Resources. We are graciously hosted on the Nisga'a First Nation treaty territory. We've been having a increasing relationship with them in recent years. So I'm a mining engineer by background, spent a few years in project development around the world, and then made my way to the capital markets. And like Michael, covered a bunch of companies from a research perspective for a few years, and then I made my way over to Ascot, being attracted to the not just investment criteria, but also the story in general. I've been gravitating towards BC, to the Golden Triangle in particular. And so what Ascot is we're a gold developer. We're Canada's most advanced gold developer right now. We're hoping to be in production around this time next year. And in full production, we would target about 150,000 ounces per year. We have a hub and spoke model. And so we have one central processing facility. It was built in the 1990s. We're going to restart that mill, and we will feed it from 4 high-grade underground deposits. That was part of the strategy that changed back in 2017 when new management and board came in and shifted the focus from relatively high footprint open pit deposits towards higher grade underground, basically eliminating a lot of the surface disturbance and being a lot more environmentally friendly. And also we consolidated the IDM mining, the Red Mountain project, about 25 kilometers to the southeast, eliminating all that additional infrastructure, and we're going to treat it as a hub and spoke model. And so really limiting a lot of the surface disturbance, having low impact underground mines. So pretty excited to get into production around this time next year.
Let's start out with the First Nations relationship, and we'll start with you, David. Nisga'a, and then Tahltan. Paint the picture for the audience in terms of that relationship. How did it get to where it is? Is it a good relationship? And the status of the agreements right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, we've always tried to have a fairly open door policy. One of the examples of that was this morning. We actually hosted an inaugural kind of meeting introduction between Andrew, who sat here about 2 hours ago from the Nisga'a Nation, and our recent investment partners from Coriapu from Peru. They're our new largest shareholder at about 20% of the company. And so, given their involvement with 20% of the shares and 2 of the board seats, we thought it would be beneficial, and we can build a lot of goodwill by getting early getting in early and introducing them to our partners. And so that's just one recent example of, it's an open dialogue, open door policy. We try to be very transparent, and that takes time, and we've spent years and years doing it. One of the things that we did through the permitting process was, instead of, as you've heard a number of other panelists before, doing consent-based permitting. And so instead of going through the permitting process and then having to go back and have the First Nation opine on that permit and on your project plans, why not, sign a CA, get the First Nation aligned early, and with them then go to the government for the permitting process. And we have found that was exceptionally helpful through our process. I mean, there was a lot of front-end work, about 3 years worth of it, but officially the permitting process for us, when we applied in January of, I think it was 2021, and we got the permits by December of 2021. And so it was a bit of a unique permitting process in that it was more of an amendment than a full EA or a full Mines Act permit. But I think getting ahead and getting alignment with our First Nation partners, with Niska Nation, was exceptionally important in that process. And the success, I think we can derive a lot of the success of that process through that partnership.
Rob, you're at the exploration stage. What are the agreements with Nisga'a? What's the relationship like?
Yeah. So we're a lot earlier along, and it just makes to the point that the earlier you get started, the easier it is later on. At Dolly Varden, we started when we had little $1 million programs, 5,000 meters, and again, it's being proactive about it and going to the First Nation, separate from having to do it through the permitting process, but going there before you even get started at work and getting everyone on board and letting them know, being open, what's going to happen, what it's going to look like. And then we do hire a lot of people from the Nisga'a, from the Nass Valley. So they're gaining skills, and it's about that education again, and not just giving them jobs. This was mentioned on the earlier panels, but we're helping them form some smaller companies, like pad building companies, and basically doing what we can with the capacity of exploration dollars, which are sometimes harder to come by than more advanced projects.
Okay, thanks. And Randy, bit of a different situation because of the Tultan. We're very involved in the underground operation, but maybe speak to this process charter, kind of a landmark agreement in terms of under the auspices of UNDRIP and a fairly unique agreement for BC.
Yeah, so there's really a couple. So the Tultan and the BC government signed what's called the Section 7 agreement. And as we heard the panel before, and we're talking about now, consent. This is about placing the Tultan First Nation right within the environmental assessment process and have them as a signatory of it. So they are now, and this is the first time in, I believe, the history of BC in Canada in mining, where a First Nation has become a direct party reviewing and being part of the environmental assessment process. So along with that, then we also then were signatories along with the Tultan and BC government ministries and what's called the process charter, which is essentially a timeline that was established based on what everybody felt was the adequate time to go through the environmental assessment process and the permitting process. So we've recently published that.
Do you want to comment on the fact that you've hired one of the Tultan's permitting staff or key people to your team?
Yeah, so look, part of a mining company like ours or any is how do you really bring First Nations along. And when incredible people like we were able to hire Naileen Moran, who was the director of their lands department for it was between 12 or 15 years or something, and directly involved with all of the permitting efforts of the mines that are up there and everything that's going on, was pretty good. Kind of, I guess, a bit of a kudos for the project that she was willing to join us. Good find.
One of the factors in the Golden Triangle we'll touch on kind of briefly, but I want to get an answer from the panelists, is there's a lot of snowfall or rainfall. And start with Rob on the exploration side. How does that impact you seasonal work? What's your start? What's your end? And what are your challenges as far as exploration?
Yeah, I mean, the Dolly Varden project is close to sea level at the southern end of the property, and then as we go up to Homestake Ridge, it's more up in the Alpine. So we do get a little bit of a later start, or we can't work all year. Our dollars are better spent doing a high intensity program in a shorter period, unlike here in a lot of Ontario where you can do winter drilling and things like that. We save all our drilling to the period between end of May and sort of the middle of October.
Okay.
And a lot of that also has to do with daylight hours, not just snow,
Yeah.
because you can't, it's
Good
a
point.
helicopter supported job, and the night times become too long for the shift drilling.
Fair enough. Randy, next. Ascot gets a lot of snow. You're a mining engineer. How are you going to manage the material movements, including all that snow?
Yeah, it's definitely probably the biggest challenge once we get into operations. So really, it's a matter of scheduling. So scheduling the pits in terms of in the good months, we're going to mine at say at 130, 140% average that we would. And in the winter, when we get the heavy snow, will be much lower. And so we'll have essentially a fleet that will switch between. So we'll be moving snow and clearing snow in the heavy winter months, and that'll switch over. All those people and the gear switch over and do rock in the summer. And
Okay.
that's generally how we handle it.
Yeah. David, you're in an underground situation right on Tidewater, at least at Stewart, but up a little bit at elevation. How are you guys going to handle the snowfall?
Better now that we've had a few years of dealing with it, and certainly we had to expand our capabilities as we got into construction, because comparing exploration to construction, you have vast laydown areas, and it's basically a massive logistical exercise, and to add snow to that is an additional layer of complexity. Yeah, there was in I think October of 2021, there was a 48-hour period where we received about 18 feet of snow. And so it's not linear, like you'll get big dumps of it. And so I've kind of always to joke with the team, like, hey, if this whole mining thing doesn't work out, we can open up a pretty good ski resort to diversify our revenue sources. But no, I mean, yeah, snow is big. We're fairly fortunate to have underground deposits. And so once we get into operation, it's relatively easier to deal with the snow. Simply have to clear the roads. It doesn't snow underground. So we're fairly fortunate from that regard. But from construction, that's been a key consideration for us. That's why right now we're kind of ramping construction back up inside the mill, and then this summer will be the key window for us between May and October to do the remaining outdoor earthworks around the tailings facility, around the water treatment plant, and then getting back underground and in the mill for commissioning next winter. So like Randy said, very seasonally considerate construction and logistical planning.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about innovation. For you, Randy, at an average grade of life of mine, about 4 grams gold equivalent, exceptional grade for an open pit. And then I expect you're going to have a lot more resources turn into reserves over the years as you explore 21 West, amongst other zones that are in the footwall rhyolites especially. Can you comment on any technology, whether it be ore sorting or some other technology that may help you enhance sorting the grade, and to what extent also maybe comment on how you think that may impact the strip ratio as you convert waste ore?
Technology. Well, I think it's going to be more, looking at grades or something. Gold's a little bit difficult, but in terms of technology, what's going to be important, I think, in that area is going to be autonomous equipment, both from a safety and from a labor perspective, and then quality. I think that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at. And then in terms of winter and how we mine, fleet management systems now have progressed to the point where you're getting 10 to 20 centimeter accuracy on those. So those are the type of things that we're going to be requiring to operate a pit both in winter and summer.
Okay, thank you. David, maybe on the innovation side, Coryapoo is bringing to bear some really good IP out of Peru. Maybe just comment on where you see innovation going in terms of mining methods, underground techniques that maybe you guys hadn't had in your playbook in the feasibility study.
Yeah, and those conversations are still happening and have yet to be had to its fullest extent. But it's been kind of interesting. We've seen a number of Peruvian investments into the Golden Triangle, one of which was Hochschild Mining buying the 60% option on the SNP project from Skeena. And then more recently, Coriapu, the majority owners of the Poderosa operation in northern Peru, buying $50 million for 19% of our company. And so it's been pretty interesting to see the investment from the Peruvian companies. And they appointed 2 board members, one of which was more of a capital markets professional, and the other was Jose Maroon, a very technically savvy individual. And I remember a few weeks ago, the first board meeting we had with him, the first thing he was asking was about the detailed flow sheet, and he was getting right into the technical aspects of the project from day one. So we're pretty excited to have the bench strength from the 2 appointees from the Coriapu side.
Okay, thanks. And Rob, exploration techniques, one thing, maybe innovation there, but also just the simple consolidation that you did with Bury, the impact it had on your share price. The market obviously wants consolidation, sensible consolidation. Maybe speak to that as well as a form of innovation.
Yeah, well, the consolidation works on a couple of levels. One is, of course, increasing your resource size, so that brings your market cap up. But it gets you into the scope of larger companies looking to acquire these properties, and it's making it easier for them to see it as a large tonnage system as opposed to these smaller deposits. And in terms of innovation, just making it a more saleable product or property, we're looking at different ways of processing. So bringing our capex down. So we were hearing about the hub and spoke type model, and we're looking at different levels of that as well. So, an innovative approach instead of trying to build one mill for each project. And this goes to First Nations as well. We're lowering our environmental footprint. So there was a news release last week with Black Wolf Copper and Gold. We're looking at the old Kitsault site, which is a moly porphyry across the water from our project, from the Kitsault Valley. Of course, we did go to the Nishka first and run the idea by them, so they were involved right from the beginning before we even announced it. But we're looking at building a mill there, for example, and then bringing the ore down from all these deposits on the Dolly Varden project, and then bringing in other companies who have smaller deposits in the area and could benefit from that. And the big thing there too is with regard to the Nishka, is giving them the capacity to be involved, not just on a labor basis, but also sort of on a capital basis as well.
Okay, no, thanks for that color. And maybe just back to David on this, because we talked about the mill options. You will have a fairly strategically located mill, as I said, on tidewater, 2,500 tons a day. At one point, it did process the SNP sulfide con, the pyrite con, and Bruce Jack has a con. Maybe just describe some of the optionality once you're up and running and hit your run rates that you see for that premier mill.
Yeah, so in the southern end of the Golden Triangle, I'm going to overly characterize it here, but in the northern side, you have massive big copper gold porphyries. You got the Seabridge project. You got Bruce Jack. It's a fairly large underground operation. In the southern end, there's a lot of companies working. I think there's something like 80 plus exploration companies at some stage earlier on in the grassroots exploration program in the southern end of the Golden Triangle. But one of the challenges is infrastructure, and it's having that infrastructure. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of high grade, specifically gold deposits. But to build a standalone project, you need visibility on at least 5-10 million ounces, because these mills are well over $1 billion to build in today's inflated terms.
There was always a big question about what happened with the SK deposit as it went to depth and plunged at depth. It just kind of disappeared. The question was it a closing of the actual basin at the time of deposition, or did it go somewhere? So we drilled a couple holes, and the one hole to the north, and this was through a bit of geophysics work and identifying, okay, there's potential fault structures and what's there. So we drilled one hole and we hit at an 850 meter depth in the rhyolites, not a bad hit, 4 grams over 32 meters. But what that's really showing us is that the pipe work, the feeder structures are there, it's alive. The rocks that are needed for the same exhalative mineralization are there. So we're going to go searching for SK kind of 2.0 this summer and see what we can find.
I'm impressed because a mining engineer being able to articulate the VMS geology and that target, it is quite exciting. We certainly researched it. And to be able to find, proof of concept and have mineralized basically contact mudstone and the rhyolite. And then you do have kind of the Rosetta Stone for finding the next one in terms of various vectoring. We've got a little bit of time left, 7 minutes. I want to go to the audience because I know Ben Whiting has a burning question. Amongst maybe my associates do too, but why don't we go through some questions from the audience, and then we'll give these gentlemen a chance to wrap up in a minute each or something like that, because I think we're going to end the session at 4:30. So Ben.
Well, I'm bound to ask one question. And the question is not a geological question. The question is, as a shareholder, when do you see the dividend payment structure coming out? And do you have a timeline for that? And that comes from a financial friend of mine who's also a shareholder with Skeena Resources. So I'll target Skeena first.
Okay, let's see. So, we're still ways off. So production 2026. So obviously, the good thing is the 1 year payback that we have on the project. So given that and the free cash generation, $600 million Canadian the first year, we believe that this will generate, in the order of 300 million free cash a year. What we do with that is always a big question. I happen to come from a company that had one of the biggest dividends in mining. So it's certainly one way to do with it. There's also many opportunities though in the area Golden Triangle in BC, and it's certainly something that once we're in production we want to look at as well.
You can have one more question, Ben.
If I may do a geological question. I'm proud of the teams that have been working up in that area, and Rob Van Egmond's team in Dolly Varden certainly. One thing that doesn't get mentioned for Homestake and Dolly Varden is the base metals potential that's there. We often hear about the silver, we hear about the gold up in Homestake Ridge, but what about the base metal credits that are going to be on that property?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't mention it, I guess, mainly to keep it a little bit simple. And as a silver company, or as any silver company, quite often you state your resources in silver equivalents. And so we're just keeping it as a silver equivalent, but based on precious metals, which sort of gives you a little more leverage on those precious metals. But yeah, there's within the system associated with the silver, there's lead and zinc. And then at Homestake Ridge with the gold, there's copper. So those credits we don't really count in, but they would add another 10 to 15% on the resource value.
David, do you want to stab at that one too? Because Premier used to have a base metal, production from a concentrate.
Yeah, back in, I think it was the 1950s, there was a base metal circuit. And in particular, you can go back through the technical reports and read on the history of it. But unfortunately, I think it was back in the 80s when they were mining, for example, the Silver Coin deposit. They would encounter a zinc or lead-rich stope and just leave it in place because there was no base metal circuit at that time. It was simply a CIL gold circuit. And so the potential is certainly there. We do have a lot of correlation between zinc and gold grades on our property. And so that's certainly something it's not our focus right now. We're building a gold mine and a gold process flow sheet in the existing process plant. But certainly for the future, that's something we are kind of keeping on the back burner, but always cognizant and aware of it. Just about a year and a half ago, we hit some 4 or 5% copper at depth near the Premier deposits. So pretty interesting stuff. Again, not the focus, but certainly something worth looking into in the future.
Thank you. Other question? Front?
On the base metal subject, maybe Rob wants to mention that Dolly Varden sitting on a Texas Creek age copper porphyry.
Yeah, exactly.
That off the news releases because we want to stay a silver company?
No, mainly because we just haven't had the time to go to it, as well as, well, to be honest, the Kitsault Valley is all in Nisga'a territory, and right now we've been keeping it simple with our consultation, and the big bulk porphyry sits on Gitnow property, so that would mean a whole new start of consultation and letting them know what's going on, which right now we just have so much work, especially acquiring Homestake Ridge, to be going after all these different types of deposits that we already have. So, but we'll be getting to the big bulk deposit, that copper gold porphyry, in the future.
Okay, well, thank you. And to wrap up the session on time, I'm going to give each panelist a minute just to wrap up their thoughts, and maybe a little bit of a roadmap going forward in fairly tight fashion. Randy, first, please.
Sure. First, thanks for having me. Yeah, in terms of Skeena and Ascot Creek going forward, we're looking forward to getting in and building it. We've got a few things coming up. We'll update the resource in May. We're going to do an updated feasibility study, building off of what we've already got. We think we can improve it, new revised mining plan, and maybe some simpler processing on that. So those are the kind of, and then the summer exploration I already touched on.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
Could be very torquey. Rob?
Yeah, so at Dolly Varden, we're basically going to be continuing sort of our last year's program, which is sort of leveraging the bank or the money that we have to see how big this is. So we were planning on an updated resource, but we made some discoveries last summer that we expanded on. Now we have to start infilling at least to get them into the inferred category, and then we have that whole gap to infill with drilling, and so we really want to see how big it is before we start spending our time infilling and moving the rest of the resources up.
Fair enough. And David?
Yeah, sure. I just want to take my time to say thank you for hosting, Kendra. Thank you, Candice, for organizing. It's been a pretty special event. And I think it's pretty unique what the BCRMA has here. Like this cooperation and collaboration between trilateral government, First Nations, and industry is something I don't recognize is even existent in other jurisdictions in Canada. And as I look around the world, this is a pretty special place we have and cooperation that we have in the Golden Triangle. So very thankful for that. Thanks for hosting.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking our three panelists with all their insights and